Hey.
What?
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Proto. I'm the founder of Locals Supporting Locals. Some of you may know us from our calendar that we published. We're on our third year now we're publishing. This is our second one here. We do have them, they're by donation, whatever you want to give. They're very informative calendars. And Locals Supporting Locals is about stopping corporatization, which is fascism at the end of the day. And so these are very, very informative calendars telling you who we are, what we do, why we do it, how to find us on Facebook and YouTube. And we now have an internet radio show that we do weekly. And then it goes on to our YouTube channel as well. And it talks about the corruption of Health Canada. It's got information on the Liberal governments, how they changed the term local. And it's got a shop local cutout directory here. And as well, on the months it tells you who our farmers are, what they grow, how to find them again, strictly organic and natural farmers, food facts, because we're rediscovering that food is our medicine here. And it's got festivals and events and money-saving coupons on the back. So now in saying that, the purpose of with Locals Supporting Locals is to help inform the community of what's going on and what's taking place in our city, in our province, country, and globally. And that's why we have Serge Brisson here tonight to help educate people on taxes in Canada here. And Dave Lindsay is hosting his tour here. He's part of an organization called CLEAR, and I'll let him tell you more about what that group is here. But by all means, if you want to pick up a calendar, I also have business cards, so you guys can register to our YouTube channel, our Facebook, and any other events. We do have another event coming up on Monday. It's for electrical pollution, which talks about smart meters, Wi-Fi, cell towers, and how they affect us as humans here. And so we have a Dr. Ross Anderson coming in on Monday, and it's the same location here, but it is booked for there and it's confirmed. So we apologize for the screw up here tonight. There was a double booking, but it's going to be very informative to say the least. So I'd like to introduce Dave Lindsay here. Clear.
Hi everyone. Most of you already know me, and for those that don't, my name is Kevin Lindsay, and I'm Vice Chairman for CLEAR, the Common Law Education and Rights Initiative. Nelson is our president of our local chapter here, and our specific objective has been, overall, has been freedom issues. Fundamentally, at our inception, our goal was to eliminate usury or interest in the Canadian monetary system. And that remains our ultimate objective today. I'm not going to get into all the reasons and reasons for why we've taken that position and the money system and so on. Just give you a bit of a background about our group and what we stand for. And we work with a lot of other people across Canada, anywhere from Halifax all the way to Victoria. We work with people. And ultimately, any issues involving freedom have to work on a cooperative basis that way. So we have tonight a good friend of mine who's coming in from has come in from Ottawa and is speaking throughout British Columbia and Alberta over the next week and a half. And one of the things we want to present to people are success stories. And unfortunately, on freedom issues, with so many governments taking them away, taking the freedoms away, there's a lot of losses out there. So, fortunately, we can tell you about a success story that's going to happen tonight. And Jean-Serge is going to speak to us for a couple hours, hour and 45 minutes, and then take questions at the end. And he's going to speak about his success story with respect to his refusal to cooperate with governments based on the slavery principle, with respect to collecting PST and GST at his business. And it's an issue that will affect every business, especially every small business in Canada, depending on how much you want to stand up for freedom in this country. And as he will talk about later, the issue applies in a much broader capacity from just taxation matters. And he'll get into that a little bit later. So otherwise, I'm going to let him speak. We're a few minutes late getting started, but we got lots of time, so let's Serge get on right now. And at the end, I'll close out again. And if anybody has any questions on some of our books out there, you can get back to me and let me know as well. So I'm going to present, ladies and gentlemen, my good friend Jean-Serge Brisson from Ottawa.
Thank you for coming. This is the Penticton Improv Tea Party Seminar. As we said, we've improvised, but I will be pointing out with a laser pointer. So, and if you don't see it, just yell it out. Or if you don't understand what I'm saying, just yell it out. A bit of my background. I got involved in politics in 1980, and I joined the Libertarian movement, federally and provincially. I ran in several elections. I also got elected as a municipal councillor in 2003 to 2006 in my municipality, Russell Township. It's a small township near the city of Ottawa. I say I'm from Ottawa, actually I'm from Bryan, Ontario. And the municipality I'm in has about 15,000 population. And I was a councillor for 3 years. So I have been part of a government, although small. I've learned a bit of the workings and the challenges that comes with wanting to do the right thing in managing a government. Now, the first slide that's on the wall is not something we're going to talk about much tonight, except that I've been involved in other issues also. One of the issues is in my municipality, after I was a councillor, they passed a bylaw forcing every new business to put up a bilingual sign, English and French. And I contested that sign by putting up a French-only sign. And we went to court, and this is what was decided at the Court of Appeal. Court of Appeal of Ontario. I was with Howard Galganoff. So taxation is not an only issue. But the reason why I point this out is in my second book, I will be addressing this issue, but this was all about property rights. So that's one of the issues that is coming up in the second book. And also the argument, although it went to the Court of Appeal, might seem dead, but I'm back in court on October 9th for the second phase of it. Anyway, so back to the tax issue. Yep.
So did you win or lose? Were they appealing?
Actually, the judge, there was, at the Court of Appeal, the lawyer for the municipality said that this bylaw did infringe my Section 2B charter rights of freedom of expression. The court, 3 judges, Court of Appeal, said that Section 2B, the bylaw did infringe Section 2B of the my freedom of expression. So they invoked Section 1 of the charter, which is a notwithstanding clause. It doesn't close anyone. So they went around it, or they defeated my right by invoking Section 1 of the charter. There are two there are two notwithstanding clauses in the charter. Section 33, which is used by the government, like they did for Quebec for Bill 101, and it has a sunset clause which has to be renewed every 5 years. The Section 1 is a notwithstanding clause for the courts, and they can invoke it at any time, and it has no sunset clause until it's defeated by a higher court or by legislation by government. And this is what we're facing right now. So the courts do admit, it's in the transcript, if I was to go through this thing, I could show you in the transcript, they admit, yeah, the bylaw infringed by Section 2B, but they invoke Section 1, bypassing or putting aside our freedom of expression, my Section 2B rights. And when I lost my rights, you all lost your rights also. I didn't lose it alone. Every citizen in Canada lost, even though it's in the Court of Ontario, every citizen in Canada lost their Section 2B rights when it came to a similar bylaw. If a similar bylaw was passed here, it could be applied here. Naturally, the highest court in Ontario is the Court of Appeal. We applied to the Supreme Court of Canada, they refused. So anyway, it's, like I said, I can talk about an hour just on that issue alone. So to go on to the next one, the next portion I'm going to talk about is the book. The last time I was here in 2008, I had a good turnout, and people were asked, I was in New Westminster, and the people said, why don't you write a book? It was the 10th presentation across the country I was making. I said, yeah, and it took me 2 years to write it. It was done in 2010. Then the hard work was to find a publisher, which I finally did. In 2012, November 2012, I had to look after a friend of mine who was being diagnosed with dementia. Until he was assessed, I had to take care of him. So I was not at home in the evenings. I come home the next morning, and I got to the back of the house, and the door is wide open. Hasn't been busted in. It looked at it as it had been unlocked. But I knew what had happened, and as I walked up the stairs into the kitchen, every drawer in the place had been ransacked. And then my presentation that I had was carried in this briefcase. I did the country with this briefcase. My whole presentation was in these little, that's another picture of the briefcase. Now, this little box here, and I'll show you the next picture, as I have it in my hands. Every slide I'm going to show you tonight was on a clear plastic that I could put on a photocopier, and a overhead projector, and you just reduce them in a photocopier, and then you can put on an overhead projector, and I was making my presentation with that. Well, my whole presentation in that box, when I got to the briefcase, I have 5 briefcases laying around my living room. That one, and another one that had all the original documents in it, were the only ones that were moved. And when I opened that one, there was 2 boxes like that, one was missing. The one with the presentation in it. And in the other briefcase, the brown briefcase, which had all the originals in a green binder, which had been locked in an office in Ottawa for over a year, I had brought it back a couple weeks before, that was gone. The briefcase was there, the contents was gone. Now, what does a petty thief need to do with a break-in? Because they stole my comic book collection. What was I mean, as I said, I never made that presentation in the Ottawa area. I made it in BC, I made it in Quebec, Bromont, Brassard, Drummondville, but I never made it in Ottawa or around the Ottawa area. Save for a little one in Russell Township, but I didn't go into the depth of this presentation here. So how did they know what to take? Because the whole content you see, the book, Fight Kyoto, and the rest of the contents in the briefcase, untouched. The other 3 briefcases, untouched, not even moved. So the question remained, who did it? How did they know what to take? Did they come to one of these presentations in BC or in Quebec? And they knew when exactly to hit to get the originals to prevent the book from being made? Because every slide I'm going to show you tonight is in the book. So and that's a bit more what the clear plastic looked like. So then, I'll start with the story. What happened, when I was 20 years old, I opened my own shop, and naturally I'm learning, and they told me if I wanted to buy supplies, radiators, or anything else, it would be good if I had a vendor's permit, because that way, when I was charged taxes, I would be charged taxes if I didn't have it. But if I wanted to pass a tax on to the customer, I had to get a vendor's permit, and therefore I could buy products without paying taxes and then charging it to the customer, which I was told was also the law. 20 years old, you want to be in business, I didn't question it. When I went to apply for my vendor's permit, as I was applying for it, the conditions were I could collect up to $400 a year, 4%, for collecting their taxes. Quick calculation was, even if I collected $1 million worth of sales tax for the province of Ontario, I was still only getting $400 in compensation. And I went, I'm going to have to work pretty hard to collect some of that money, and all I'm getting is $400. So I said, I'm going to do it for free. I never took the compensation. Now, I opened my business in 1974. In 1985, the law was changed because of people like Bruce Knapp, who had gone to paint shops and hardware stores and bought products. And when he got to the counter, they said, you know, the tax is so much. He says, I'm not paying the tax. So they would make him sign the receipt, and they'd send it to the head office for provincial sales tax in Ontario. And then the province was responsible for collecting the tax from that person. Well, when you've got $3 and some cents that you owe the province, and they're sending a 2-man team to collect, you know, knocking on the person's door to collect a couple of dollars taxes, I mean, that's a lot of manpower, hours lost, and a lot of resources wasted. So in 1985, they changed the law. Prior to 1985, that's what I said, it was based on a voluntary basis. After 1985, the law changed. And in 1985, they said, no more can we take a customer's not happy with the tax and send it to the head office. Now we were responsible for billing that tax. We have to go with the customer or argue with them, but we were it. And when I saw that, I said, okay, now we are officially slaves. Because when a customer comes in my door, says, how much is the rad? And I say, $100, I made a sale for myself. But the minute we start talking about taxes, I take off my radman hat, now I'm putting on my taxman hat. And from that moment on, my time becomes government time. Who's paying for that time? The compensation of $400? Well, how much does that cover for the time I'm going to spend arguing with a customer who doesn't want to pay the tax, wants it included in the price, and if it's included in the price, I'm basically paying the tax, I'm diminishing my revenue or my sale, or they don't want an invoice at all, they want it to go under the table. But I'm telling the customer, I've bought my product, when I get audited or when I have to do my income tax return, I got to declare, I bought 100 rads, I've sold 80, I got 20 in stock. They're going to know how much if they come in and check, and they say, oh, you only have 10 in stock. Where are the other 10? I sold them under the table. Well, what's going to happen? I'll be fine. So from 1974 to 1989, I was immaculate. I was never late on filing, never late on giving them their money. I wanted nothing to do with their money. So the government never came to audit me or anything like that. 1989, business is changing. I had to let go of a few people that were working for me, and I sent in the return late. I was late by 2 weeks, but I caught it, and I sent it in with the money, and a month later I got a fine. And I said, and I called them up and I said, you know, can't you do something with this fine? So they came back they said, well, let me look at your file. They came back, they said, Monsieur Brisson, you've had an excellent record all the time that you've been doing business. We'll take the fine away. No problem. In the following year, same time of the year again, because I get very busy in May, I again forgot to send it in for that period. So again, they sent me a fine. And I don't know if you can see this very well. Oops. Oops. Up in here. Okay, well I'm gonna have to. Anyway, the fine is the amount of money here. That's going to be very hard. Is $400 and some odd. And anyway, there's interest and penalty assessed. So if the fine came out to $49.12. This is in your book, probably at the second chapter. But this is the second fine they sent me in 1990. So I called them again, and I said, "Can you not take this off?" I said, "You know, I caught it again 2 weeks late. I sent the money in. They never had a chance to respond prior to say, oh, Mr. Brisson, you're late and everything else. I always caught it." They came back on the phone. They said, well, you have a once-in-a-lifetime allocation of making a mistake. You had it last year. We cannot take it off again. So that prompted me to deal with them in a manner that I had wanted to deal with them since the day I took up my vendor's permit. Because I realized from the first day that I was in business, I was being used as a slave. I was being used as cheap labor. So I sent them this letter, and right here you can see October 22nd, 1990. Because of the light, I'm going to tell you what page it is in your book. If you all have a book. Oops, it's at the end. On page 163. 163? Okay. I'm gonna have to read it through here. I'm writing this letter in response to the correspondence I have been receiving from you for the past 3 months. It seems that you have assessed me with a penalty for filing a sales tax return after the deadline. Oh, I see what I have to do. And that penalty is 10% of the amount plus 14% interest. You obviously believe that somehow you are owed these amounts, and that as a loyal subject, I am supposed to blindly and faithfully obey without question your authority and your right to ask me to work for a government for the simple privilege of being able to serve you. Well, I have a surprise for you. I've decided that not only am I late in filing my return, but I do not intend to pay the penalty you have assessed me with. Nor will I pay any other fine or extra amount you intend to charge me with. My motive for this action is as follows. Since 1985, the retail sales tax of Ontario has, by decree of the Ministry of Revenue, by the use of the law, forced every business owner that deals with the general public to become a government tax collector. Because the law says that those who collect sales tax are responsible for the collection of that tax, and anyone refusing to pay it must deal with the business person and no one else. We, the self-employed business people, have for the past 5 years been forced by law to collect sales tax, are responsible for making sure it is charged to everyone that does not have a tax number, and do the necessary paperwork that is required. Any grievances by the general public about sales tax, we are the ones who have to deal with the flack. All this work and all this responsibility, and what do we, the entrepreneurs, get for our troubles? 4% of the amount collected, up to a maximum of $500. They had increased the limit of compensation from $400 when I registered to $500 a few years later, about the year before I sent in my returns late. When I count all the hours that I personally spent collecting your tax over the period of 1 year and compare it with the amount of money that is paid out to collect it, excuse the expression, it smells. I've counted that for every time I tell a customer how much the tax is going to be on their purchase, every time I have an argument with a customer who does not want to pay the tax, then writing in all my bills, then when the time comes to send your tax in, I have to spend time during regular business hours to tally it up, and if I do not have the time during regular hours, I have to do overtime to do your paperwork. Which I might add, I normally charge any regular customer extra when I am asked to work after hours. I have counted in the space of 1 year, I spend time with 1,000 customers, and it takes me the average of about 5 minutes per client to explain, collect, and administer the tax. I estimate about 80 hours per year that I spend on collecting your tax. I collect about $3,000 per year in sales tax, and I'm allowed 4% of that amount, which means a grand total of $120. Divide by 80 hours comes out to a grand total of $1.50 per hour. I don't know, but it seems that there is something terribly wrong here. I feel that to have a law that forces people to work for only a few dollars an hour at a time when the minimum wage is at $5.40 an hour and is about to be increased to $7 an hour because people say they can't live on such low wages, how come you, the Ministry of Revenue, can make people work for under the minimum and get away with it is beyond me. If I hire someone for less than what the minimum wage is, I can be charged and sent to jail. But the government passes a law saying that because people who are self-employed are obligated to give them their time for less than anybody else who's paid a minimum wage in the province they're in, well, that's legal. I'm sorry, but that's slavery. You are excluding a segment of the population from being treated fairly compared to the rest of the population. That is second-class citizens, and that does not exist in Canada. Not officially, anyway. You can't declare a group of people being second-class citizens and having to do something that other people don't have to do. Another thing that has got me thinking about the sales tax situation is a side of it that I don't think has been thought thoroughly through. Before you, the province, can charge your tax, we, the business people, have to work, produce something with our labor. You rely on us to work and spend our time producing goods and services, and you, the government, have to wait till we have produced, so that you may tax it once it is sold to a client. That, in a sense, is like the workings of a parasite existing on the life force of someone else. Thank you. So I didn't mind calling them parasites because that's what parasites do. They live on the life force of someone else, or something else, or another, but they cannot exist on their own. And governments only exist because we allow them. We create them. They are a creation of the people. Now, socialists, and if you read a book called The Law, written in 1850 by Frederick Bastiat, 75 pages long. Halfway through the book, you know exactly what a law should, well, within the first 4 pages, you understand exactly what a law, the person of a law, is. It is very simple. It is meant to protect the rights of people by being negative, by not forcing people to do anything except respect other people's rights. The only time you break the law is when you infringe on other people's rights and freedoms and property. That's what is the basis of and the reason why a law exists. Nothing else. So the law can be found online. It is public domain, easily found. But the Ontario Libertarian Party and I think the Federal Libertarian Party also sells the book, The Law, for a few dollars. But it's not hard to find. But I recommend that if you are interested in finding out how a law is meant to be constructed, read that book. I feel that for the past 5 years, I have been forced by law to work for the provincial government of Ontario as a slave. I have the right to be paid the same amount of money that you pay your regular tax collectors, plus the benefits that they are entitled to, which is why as of this day forward, I do not intend to submit to your deadlines anymore. I will send in my returns when I can find time to do it, and if you do not agree with this, then I will evaluate the amount of time I spend on your case and assessing you a fee comparable to my hourly shop rate of $30 an hour. I will be assessing you for the past 5 years, since that is when I became an official tax collector. And by my calculation, 80 times 5 equals 400 hours. At $30 an hour, that comes out to $12,000. Sounds more like it. I hate working for nothing. And I almost forgot. The late payment penalty. As you are doing to me, why can I not do unto you? 10% interest plus 14% penalty would be a fair amount. The point of this letter is to bring attention to the total unfairness of the taxing and collecting system of this country. We, the business community, are being used as a slave labor force as tax collectors for governments in Canada and maybe in other parts of the world also. No government should have the power to pass any kind of legislation that forces people to work for a government for less than what other people living in the same country are paid to do as a full-time job. If in your eyes, as the government, you see the business community as being a group that is to be exploited for revenue for the government, then I conclude that the private entrepreneur is a second-class citizen compared to an individual who works for a wage. I hope that you will consider this letter with the proper attention, and I expect that you will contact me as soon as you can. Yours truly, Jean-Serge Brisson, owner of Independent Radiator. That letter set the tone for what was going to happen with the province of Ontario and even the government of Canada when they kicked in for the GST. Now, I sent the letter off. That was, when I wrote that letter, it was basically a vent of 16 years of frustration and pent up anger against what I knew when I was 20 years old when I registered, a slave act by the government. But in 1985, they really kicked it in, as I said before. And I always said, the compensation, I'm not taking it. I did it for free. It felt it was going to be my contribution to the social well-being of my community. I would give them my labor for free. That way I was in control of how much I was going to get for my labor. I don't accept being paid a pittance. I don't accept being forced to do something for nothing. I did it for being forced to give labor, but being told I have to do it for nothing. I decided I was going to do it for nothing. So when I mailed the letter, I figured, oh, I'm going to get a form letter back or no response. So that was in October 22nd. In the middle of November, I'm at the front of my shop. Both doors are open. I got a few customers in the shop. Then I see this car coming in the yard. And I don't know why. I mean, I have cars every day coming in my yard. Several cars every day come in my yard. This one hit me. I said, that's government. And sure enough, the car stopped, doors open, a man and a woman got out, and they had these long trench coats, just like you'd see on X-Files. Investigators of some kind, inspectors, and they had a clipboard in their hand, and on the clipboard was my letter. Every second line was highlighted in yellow. One radio talk show host that gave me an interview when the book came out in May said he had read the book. He says it was probably more like dipped in yellow because every sentence was bothering them. So they said, could we speak with Jean-Serge Brisson? I said, that's me. Well, we'd like to have a word with you. So I said, okay, fine. And I turned to my clients and I said, would you like to sit in? Because I wanted people to know what was going on now. I mean, if these people are going to come down and pay me a visit like that, well, I'd like to have witnesses. They said, nope, they couldn't get out of the shop fast enough, like rats on a sinking ship. Yet my ship wasn't sinking. It was far from sinking. If there was a ship that was going to sink, it's the province. And they didn't know it until several years later. Anyway, so the first thing they said is, you should found your, I mean, whatever prompted you to write us this kind of a letter? And I told them, the fines. I collect your money and you're charging me? You're penalizing me for being a good collector? I mean, I don't hide any money from you. I don't do anything like that. I send you your money. Yeah, I was late. So what? I mean, I'm late because I'm busy. When I'm busy, I collect taxes and you make more money. But you're penalizing me for that? Well, she said, you know, because it was a man and a woman. She said, and the woman was the lead. She said, you know, you should count yourself lucky that the government allows you to deduct the expenses of running your business. And I said, okay, so you're saying that if they didn't do that, then you'd tax 100% of what I make. I wouldn't stay in business very long. As a matter of fact, you'd have no business staying in business. They'd all close down. That is what an economy does. So you have no choice to allow businesses to claim their expenses. That's what greases the economy. That's what keeps the economy going. Business, capitalism. So, otherwise, you have no economy. So when I explained that to these people who were either college or university educated, they realized that I knew more about business than the average Joe. So they changed their tactics. They said another thing that they brought, like we talked for 90 minutes, and they kept bringing up one issue after the other, until they realized that they weren't going to bamboozle me or bury me with BS. The next line they said is, you know, that poor guy that works for you, if he loses his job, he's got nothing. You have a business. And I said, well, that poor Joe that you mentioned, if the business closes and he loses his job, he loses what, a week or two salary if I can't pay him? But he can go off and find another job. What has he lost? Only a week or two salary. I, on the other hand, worked 3 different jobs to get this business going. My main job that I still had at the rat shop that employed me in Ottawa when I was starting the business, I would deliver pizzas at night or in the weekend, and then when I had work come in for my part-time shop, part-time job as a shop owner, because I wasn't full-time until a year later, I said, I had 3 jobs going to get this business off the ground. So I spent 15, 16 years now in this, and I said, and you're saying that if I close the shop down tomorrow, I'm not losing anything? I'm losing my life's work. I'm losing my life savings. Everything I own is in this shop. And you're saying that he's the one that has to be pitied? Businesses across the country close down and people lose their life savings. I'm only one of many that goes through this. So when she realized that I knew a lot more, again, as I said, that I knew a lot more about how things went, and luckily, as I said before, in the beginning, I had joined the libertarian movement. I had learned how my rights and my freedoms worked. Where do you find them? As I said, in the law. Stuff like that. I educated myself in my rights and freedoms by being involved in politics. It's an unofficial education, but it's an education nonetheless. Reading stuff that is officially recognized by other people, like John Locke and other people who wrote many freedom or libertarian ideas. Once you've read them, it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer or a layman, if you understand them, they apply the same way. So when they realized that I knew a bit more what I was thinking, they backed off. But as they were leaving, they had another question for me. They said, you complained that you don't get paid enough to collect our taxes, yet you're not collecting anything in compensation. You're not keeping anything. Like even in 1985 when the law changed, I still didn't collect any compensation. And I said, well, she said, why don't you do that? Why don't you take the compensation at least? I said, if I accept, or if I did take the compensation, it means I'm accepting being paid a minimum, less than minimum wage. I'm accepting to be paid $1.50 an hour, and I refuse. I deserve $30 an hour, or whatever my shop rate is, and I deserve to charge it any way I want. Not deserve, I have a right to. You're taking that right away from me. So she understood right away the slavery aspect. She said, well, since 1985, that compensation is there for you to take. It came out to $700 and some odd dollars. And she said, and I said, well, no, I don't want to give it to a charity. She said, no. And she insisted. She said, only you can decide what can happen with that compensation. So I said, okay, fine. I said, I'm not going to bother with it. But those words would come and bite them in the end. So I got a response to the first letter, but at the same time, I sent them a second letter. I didn't bother putting the second letter up because it was only to get answers to issues that had come up. But the second letter was to send them this. Oh, by the way, the first letter was replied to by R.A. Robertson, the acting director. Now, what you see here is an invoice. I listed the taxes from 1985, January 1st, 1985 to December 30th, not the taxes, but the labor that I charged. It's $2,400. Like this, again, every document I'm showing you is in the book. They're at the end of the book though. And 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90. $2,400 a year came out to $14,400, and then I put in a late filing and an interest came out to $17,640. That is what I assessed them for 6 years of labor. And I said, you know, this is what you owe me, if you want to play that way. Because the second letter that I had sent them, like I said, I sent this in, but following their meeting, I generated this invoice. Now, I had no intention of generating the invoice, but like I said, following that first meeting, I felt that I needed to do that. Now, after the first letter, they responded to the second letter, but this one here, the interesting part of it, is the last section, right here. And it says, the collection and payment of retail sales tax is based on a system of voluntary compliance. Voluntary compliance. I had a friend of mine who read the book. He said, I tried that on my wife. So I told my wife, he says, sex with me is voluntary, but I demand compliance. I said, how was the couch that night? He says, very comfortable. Didn't have to put up with the bitching. So, but here it is. Voluntary compliance. Through all the letters, they keep talking about how much it is a responsibility on the business to collect the money for the government, yet it's voluntary. But if we don't collect it, they have a way of enforcing compliance. And it is either by audits or by fines and penalties. So when you hear or you see voluntary compliance, voluntary means you do it because you want to, but complying to voluntary is a non-rational phrase. So when I sent them this letter, then when they sent me the second response, it's still R.A. Robinson, but it's for A.B. Williams, which is a director. R.A. Robinson is the assistant director, and Mr. Williams is the director. Well, what happened is in the beginning of 92, beginning of 91, the compensation that they had been talking about, and how I was supposed to be the only one dealing with it. And I had been sending all my returns late after this. After the first fine, every return I had to send in was sent in late. So the fines had accumulated to $250 odd. And I wasn't paying them. And I was getting letter after letter asking me to pay them. So the someone in the office got the idea to take the compensation allowed for fiscal year 1, 2, and 3, apply it together, and pay themselves off, leaving me with a credit not of $714, but of $462. And they paid off the fines that way. Wow. After getting it personally from their investigator, getting it twice in 2 letters from the province, that I was supposed to be the only one to decide what to do with the compensation, someone in the office did it differently. Did he make a mistake? Was he allowed one mistake in a lifetime? Was he fired? I never knew. Never found out. But what happened is this allowed me, this opened the door to do something I wanted to do from the very beginning, in a sense. I had it in the back of my mind. Like I said, I had a plan, but I never figured I was going to put it out. When I saw them stumbling through the process of how they were trying so hard to get me back in line, and the threats not working, well, it was a very simple thing to execute the plan. And the plan was this. Mr. Robinson, I read your letter, and I am disappointed that nothing is going to be done to change the working condition that business owners are left to deal with in collecting your sales tax. You wrote in your letter that I was the one that had to decide what to do with the credit that I had accumulated with you. Obviously, there is a glitch in communication between your departments, because you have deducted the penalty that you have assessed me from the credit that I have accumulated with you. If that is the way you intend to settle my grievance with you, I am left with no choice but proceed in the same manner. Included is the follow-up to the first invoice that I have sent you, and you leave me no choice in the manner that I am acting. My intent was to make you realize that your taxing system is unfair and needs to be redone so as to respect individual liberties. And that is what I sent them. The accumulated amount of money was $17,640. I had tacked on an interest of $360, came out to $18,000 even. The taxes I had collected for the month came out to $634, and I deducted it from the $18,000, bringing a balance that they now owe me. You should go around to the back. Yeah, okay. Balance owing. So I did to them what they did to me. I deducted the sales tax I was now collecting off of the money they owed me. Because one thing I told the girl when she came to my office and in the beginning, they tried to lay the bomb down that she said, you know, if you don't want to pay, we have ways of collecting the money. And I said, be careful what you do, because I collect your money. Well, they just found out what happens. Because I took the money I was collecting from them and applied it to the credit that had been established. They said, oh, you know, we understand, because that's just it. In the letter, they admitted we're not being compensated properly. But there's no way they can pay us a salary. Didn't deny it, they admitted it, then I felt it was valid. So if they can deduct the fines off an accumulated credit, then I can do the same thing. So then that prompted another letter. And this other letter in June, like I said, there was 4 letters. Anyway, in the end, I'm not sure what time I've got right now. In the end, it came down to, after I sent them that invoice, this is the letter they sent me in June, and it's signed by Mr. A.D. Williams. Now I've got the man in charge of the tax department in Ontario sending me the letter directly. How many times does the head of a department send you a response to a letter you've sent them? Not very often. Not very often. And if I'd addressed the letters to the minister, I don't know what he would have done, but I do know that these ended up on a lot of politicians' desks, as you'll see a little further. Anyway, they sent me this letter, hoping that I would get in line, and I sent them a final letter, July 13th, telling them that I had enough, and I sent them another invoice. Now every time that they sent me a letter, I was sending them an invoice, deducting the amount of taxes I collected off of the salary I said that they owed me. That infuriated them. Now, it came to a point where I can't continue this like that. So I sought a few people, and I was recommended to go for the media. And I said, yeah, but how do I do that? So they pointed me towards a person. His name was Dave Brown. And he said, I said, can you look at my papers? I told him about my story. He says, well, okay, I'll have a look at it. He wasn't too sure if I was a kook or a nut or off my rocker or what. But he had never heard of my argument before. He says, I've never heard anybody put that argument together like you have. So he read the material, calls me up, he says, yeah, I'm doing a story. And the article that came out was, shop owner seeks wages in tax scheme. Now, in order to, I can't read it well there, but after a year of being a thorn in the bureaucratic side of government, Jean-Serge Brisson is well on his way to becoming a hemorrhoid. That article made it clear across the country. From BC to Halifax, I had phone calls the next day, and people were telling me it's about time somebody took on the government. And when I wrote my book, and people started reading it, last month, we're now in July, we're now in September, so this letter came in July from a man who ordered my book online. And he says, I'm an 83-year-old ordained deacon in the Catholic Church, and I'm a member of Divine Infant Parish here in Orleans. It's a suburb of Ottawa. So I do a lot of reading, primarily scriptural texts, but I have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, Tea Party of One. On page 34 of your book, Dave Brown likened you to a hemorrhoid in his article in the Ottawa Citizen. If that is so, then in my mind, you strike me as one of the smartest, if not the smartest hemorrhoid in the business, bar none. Congratulations. I really enjoyed reading your book, read it daily until I finished it in bed last night. It is extremely well written and very interesting. I love your style of writing. It captures the reader's attention on every page. I congratulate you for your honesty, your unwavering determination, and for standing up for your beliefs and for your rights in this country. When you write another book, please keep me in mind. I would like a copy. Getting a letter from a deacon isn't something I figured I'd be getting. That would happen, but yeah, they read politics too. So this article came out, and it led to many other articles. Dave Brown ended up writing 30 articles on the issue. And he kept it alive. And he told me once, he said, every time I write an article about you, I get phone calls from the bureaucrats saying, stop giving the man attention. Because the more attention he gets, we get problems. We have trouble when we go see people and they're referring his name. So that was the article that started the whole thing. And as they had threatened, eventually they did seize my bank account, taking a full amount of 25 cents. I had circumvented my bank account a long time. The minute they mentioned the bank, that they could see the bank account, I called my bank right away, and I said, how much money do I need to keep in my account to keep it active? They said 25 cents. So I would make my deposit and pay the bills right away. The money went in and out immediately. So my bank account, and when the day came that they seized my bank account, I had no fear. But they opened the door again for me to, like for every action they did, I was able to do a reaction. And the reaction was something they never expected. And when I did something unexpected, they reacted in a way that opened the door even more for me to react again. Because they had one way of dealing with things. And that was the only way they could follow. It's like there's a torpedo coming. Yes, but we have to get there. Down the torpedo, we're going in anyway. And that's what they did with me. They could not fathom any other way of operating than what they were used to doing with a regular case. But I was no regular case. I was challenging their very existence. So when they seized the bank accounts, I wrote them this letter. This letter is to notify you that as of this day forward, I am terminating my employment with the Ministry of Revenue. I am also returning my vendor's permit. I will no longer be needing it, since I will not be charging any more sales tax of any kind. My reason have been explained in the great details in the 4 letters that I have written into your department. And it's in English and French. So I called Dave and I said, well, the time has come to give in my permit. He says, no problem, so I'll write a story. So I called him the night before, and the next morning I was in Ottawa at the tax office. I asked to talk to somebody in charge. The person comes out, his name was Dan McLeod. He was in charge, retail sales tax manager, apparently. Comes out around the counter and he says, Monsieur Brisson. We shake hands, but I was surprised. I said, I didn't tell him I was coming. How do you know I'm coming? How do you know who I am? He says, I read the article in the Ottawa Citizen. Dave had written the article within 10 hours. Inside of the 12 hours that I notified him what I was going to do, and by the time I was in, it was in the paper. Like I said, I had a friend in the media who kept the focus on the story, on the issue, because he said, this is unique, and you can read Dave Brown's foreword in the book. I asked him to write a foreword, and he explains in a way why he did it. And so we sat in, he brought me into a little room, around a table about this size, we talked, and I said, well, here's my vendor's permit, I'm not collecting tax anymore, I'm resigning. I said, as the letter explained. I said, can you send this into Toronto and deal with it? He said, yeah, I will. So he did that, and I figured, okay, what can happen now? The law says I have to have a vendor's permit on my wall to be in business. And they do reiterate that if I don't have the permit, they can close me down. So I'm going, let's see if they can dare close me down. Well, they sent me this letter, and it came in November 8th. When I opened it, I got a surprise. It was recently brought to our attention, or to my attention, as we're talking about Mr. Williams, that you returned your vendor's permit to the Ottawa field office, even though you are maintaining your business operation. Like, how dare I continue to be in business, even though I turned in my vendor's permit? The situation leading to the current problem first began when an assessment for interest and penalty was, so he goes through the whole story. But the interesting paragraph is here. You are still considered a vendor under the Act, even though you return your permit to the Ottawa field office. The permit shows issued to your company remains valid for as long as you transact business in Ontario or until the ministry cancels or suspends your permit. So they're basically saying, we're the ones, when we suspend your permit, then you'll have to go out of business. But we didn't suspend it. We're returning to you so you can continue being in business. Seems like somebody doesn't know how to play poker. It doesn't know when like, I could read the bluff. I could easily read the bluff. They don't know what to do. They went, oh my God, he's returned the permit. So we have to charge him now. Yeah, but if we charge him, what are we going to charge him with? He'll put the issue of slavery in court. We can't have that. So let's return the permit. As I mentioned in my previous letter to you, progressive legal action will be taken against you, against your firm. Upon reflection, I hope you will reconsider your decision and will comply with the act. Mr. Williams, the director. So that last paragraph is really the desperation. I hope you reconsider, because we don't know what to do with you anymore. We really don't know what to do anymore. Naturally, I'm ticked, because I thought, you know, returning the vendor's permit. I'm not happy that they are not settling, but I can see the bluff on their side. But I decided I was going to do something else. But in returning the vendor's permit, Dave Brown wrote up another article. He's now into his 3rd or 4th article. So and this is the kind of letters that I kept getting, threatening me with your failure to comply with the requirement is an offense under section whatever the act, and upon conviction, you're liable for a fine. So it's always about threats, letter after letter, threat, 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 but no legal action. So then I told Dave, you know, I'm going to get rid of this permit, and I'm going to do it permanently. So in preparing for it, I contacted Global, I contacted CTV, I contacted CBC. I'm going back into the office. The only media that followed was CBC. And when they sent me a reporter and a camera crew, and they followed me into the sales tax office again. And this time I have other friends that came along. And Mr. Dan McLeod came out again, and he says, are you all with Mr. Brisson? And they all said yes. So as he's coming up to me, he's extending his hand, thinking I'm going to give him the permit again. And I got the permit in my right hand, and as he gets closer, and close enough, I took out a lighter and set the permit aflame. And I burnt it in their office. And so from there on, I lost all notion of what's happening other than what I'm concentrating on, because the last thing I want is to damage public property. And then when I couldn't hold it anymore, I had brought an aluminum pan, and I dropped it in the pan and let it finish burning. And then once it was all burnt, I crushed the ashes so that they couldn't reconstruct it in any way. And then when I looked up, Dan's gone. He's not there. So he's on the other side of the counter. I dragged the plate to him, and I said, everything that I brought to you, you've ignored. You've ignored my concerns. You've ignored the issue. I said, and now the document that is so much in question has been destroyed, and I expect that you will finally do the legal proceedings that you're threatening with. I said, and I do not intend any more correspondence by you will be returned unopened. I said, you act or you leave me alone. I said, can you pass that message along? He says, yes, I will. So I left. When we got downstairs, the cameraman who was taping me from behind, when I put it on fire, he moved around to tape that. And I've confirmed that they still have that segment on file in the archives at CBC. I just haven't found a way to get it out yet. But eventually it has to come out. And if the book becomes a big success, you should be seeing that on TV at some point. But anyway, the cameraman, they were laughing. By the time we got downstairs, he says, when you took out the lighter and you burnt that permit, he says, the manager, his jaw dropped to the floor and he took off. He says he went into his office and he must have gone to the manual saying, burning vendor's permit. What do we do with that? The cameramen were having a hoot. They were having more fun than any other case had been given. And, but there was one lady there, her name was Margaret Ritchie, and she's in the book also. She's the one that had confirmed to me that I was right. She's an expert in the Canadian Constitution. She's forgotten more, but Yeah, she probably has forgotten more than what we know about it. Anyway, so from there, the next day, I called up the MPP for Brockville, a man that I knew very well, and I asked him to put a question on the floor of the legislature of Ontario to the Minister of Finance. And he did that. That's the, after the vendor's permit, that is the article that Dave Brown wrote about it. Now, here is the question that was put to the ministry. I'm afraid. Oops. Oh, there's one missing. Okay, great. I'm gonna have to. Anyway, as you can see, this is. Oh yeah. No, it's not doing the right thing anymore. Well, I'm trying to say Queen's Park, Legislative Building. It is Robert Runciman, MPP, Leeds Grenville. To the Honorary Shelley Ward Martin. She was the Deputy Minister of Finance, along with Floyd McLaughlin. They called him Pink Floyd. But the question was put in the Legislature of Ontario, and the question was, what are you going to do about M. Brisson and burning his vendor's permit? And the last paragraph is, M. Brisson's refusal to comply with the law of the province, a law which is being followed by some 100,000 other vendors in Ontario, is not a freedom or liberty issue. The collection of retail sales tax by vendors is a duty imposed for the privilege of doing business in Ontario. It is a privilege to have a business. I didn't know that the government was allowing us, by the goodness of its heart, to be in business. But that is what they say here. It is no different from any of the other requirements imposed by federal, provincial, or municipal law. The Retail Sales Tax Act does provide for penalties and fines for failure by a vendor to comply with his or her collection obligations. The ministry will take the appropriate remedies available in law in dealing with Mr. Brisson's illegal actions. They never did anything. They threatened and threatened. As I said, this is all a game of poker. They were bluffing, but they didn't see how well I could read the bluff. And even if they were serious, I was more than ready to take them in court, to take them on in court. But they never did anything. And these are more letters that they filed. So eventually, they sent me a last document in October, but I ignored it. Then they sent me another letter in December, which you'll see in the book, and in that letter they're telling me that if I don't file the last return for October, which is when I sent them the letter, and when I turned in my vendor's permit, and they sent me back a letter, it was mid of October, October 15th, that I turned in my vendor's permit the first time. And they sent me a return asking me to file for October only. And I saw a trap in there, because they weren't asking me for the previous month that I had collected taxes. So I did a double, I photocopied the return, and from the time period August till October 15th, I declared the amount of taxes I collected. They were asking till the end of October. And from October 15th to October the 31st, I put down 0. And I said this. I can experiment some more. In this letter, you will find a sales tax return for August to October 15th. Your return that you delivered by hand at my place, because I wasn't opening anything anymore, so they had to deliver everything they wanted me to do by hand now. A business was asking for October only. That was a weird thing. They were only asking for October, because I could see they were concerned. What happened after October 15th? Did he continue collecting taxes? Did he put money in his pocket now? Is this what he wants? Because all they could see, they're used to dealing with business people who are greedy. Those who cheat on their taxes, they see them as greedy. And they figured, oh, now he's tired of the game. Now he thinks he's going to put the taxes directly in his pocket. Maybe we can get him there. I don't understand why you would only want the 1 month. So I gathered a mistake was made, and I have corrected that mistake by making photocopies of the return, and I have altered the dates so as to make them understandable. You will notice that as of the October 15th, October 31st, the amounts are 0. That is because as of that date, my vendor's permit was remitted to the sales tax office in Ottawa and was accepted. I therefore declare my business a sales tax-free operation, and no sales tax of any kind has been collected since that date. I hope that this will be your last attempt on trying to get me on a technicality. I'm telling them, I know what the game is being played. Include in my last and final statement to you for the work done for your department. And I sent him another invoice. But this is the return what it looked like. October 15th to October 31st was zeros. And this is the invoice that I sent them. Whoops. $510 in tax have been collected, and I deducted off the amount that they owe me. So that was, you see, again, another letter in 1980. So we're coming into other documents. So that was basically it for the province. The threats ceased after that letter. When the 91 started, one of the people from the province called me up. And they said, well, you know, they had thought I would get back into the fold. And I said, no. So he said, well, what about you going to do about the GST that's coming in? Because GST kicked in January 91. I said, same thing, only I'm not registering. I refuse to register. Because if I do go out and register for the GST, that means I'm accepting being a slave. I'm not registering. I never did. In December of 91, I get a phone call from a fellow who was in charge of collecting registering anyone who was deemed to collect GST in the Ottawa area. He called me up. He says, I want to have a meeting with you. So he came down and he went through 4 questions. He asked me he said, if you register, you'll get $1,000 back for the manufacturer's sales tax that is charged on all your inventory that you paid out. You'll get a refund of up to $1,000. I said, no thanks, because he's asking me to sell my soul for $1,000. I said, no thanks. And I told him that. I said, so I sell my soul for $1,000. He said, you're not selling your soul. And then he went on to another question, until he thought he came in with my shop under the impression or the idea that I was collecting the GST, putting it in my pocket, not wanting to give it. When he found out that I was not collecting it, he got a very big surprise, and he couldn't believe it. And this is where you will find it also in your book. Pass this around. This is what I did with my invoice. How come these are all blank, Dave? I think we run out. We paid for a lot of blank copies. No more there?
Yeah, you can watch more. Grab the run.
That is in your book also, but that's just an enlarged size. On the bottom is a disclaimer that says this firm does not collect GST and PST. And if you, the customer, I don't say the company, but if you feel that this tax should be paid, you may send it in yourself. I left it to the customer, the responsibility to send in the tax. The law has never been defined on this, but the principle is, if you do warn your customers that you do not collect taxes, you're legal. Bruce Ryder in BC had it on the side of his restaurant when you walked in, and it said, "This restaurant does not collect business sales tax." And he was taken to court, and basically he got off, but I'll get back into it later. But the lawyer that said it to my friends, he's a high-profile lawyer in Canada, said if he wants to put that disclaimer on the bottom of his bill, it should work. So it's never been really tried in court. But then I was never really taken to court on it because they don't want to have that disclaimer tested in court. Because if it is tested and it is approved that businesses warning their customers that they do not do such an action for the government, well, that's legal. You're warning the customer. Because if you don't have the disclaimer and the customer comes in and says, "It's $100 here, the taxes must be included," they assume the tax is included. And that's why they don't want to test it. And that's why you must notify your customers. We don't collect taxes here. It's up to the customer. If they really think that those taxes are paid, send it in. They'll take your money. So in my case, when the guy from GST saw this disclaimer, he says, "He doesn't collect taxes?" Oh, and he couldn't believe it. Anyway, he said, "Well, can we audit your books?" And at that time, I was still doing income tax returns. And I said, "Sure." So they went through my books, and within a month, I got a letter in the mail. Now, he was threatening to take me to court for not registering. And I said, "Well, that's what I want. I want to test the slavery issue." What happened was, after the audit, I get a letter in the mail, I open it up, it's my GST number. They registered me against my will. I called them up. I said, "What's this? I thought you were going to charge me for not registering." Well, he says, "We're able to assess that you made more than $30,000 a year. Therefore, I have the power to register you against your will." He says, "But now, you're going to have to do the paperwork. And if you don't do the paperwork, we'll take you to court." I have him on the line, I'm going, "You're going to lose on the paperwork. You'll win, but you're going to lose." And that's what they did. 2 years later. We're now into end of 91. I've been registered. They sent me the returns that they wanted me to file. I never filed them. They accumulated in time. By the middle of 1993, we were up to 10 returns I hadn't filed. But now we're having an election coming up. And at the end of August, I get a summons. I go to court. The charge is failure to file returns. And they wanted me to file 2 returns. They were charging me for 2 returns out of 10. I got to court. The judge says, "How do you plead?" And I said, "Not guilty." And he turns to the Crown, who's sitting at a table from about here to there. He's like this the whole time, just his face is buried in his hands. And when the judge said, "What do you want to do?" he got up, pulls his face out, and he says, "Your Honor, we have to act immediately on this. There's going to be an election called very soon, and this has to be dealt with immediately." Now, all of a sudden, my issues become very political. They know I'm going to talk about tax collection and the GST if I am left, because I'm going to run as a candidate for the Libertarian Party. I'm going to be talking about the GST, what I've been doing to them, PST, what I've been doing to them for the last 2 years. They don't want it out. So, what's the best way? Let's take them to court. Let's charge them. So they gave me another date. I show up in court on September 7th. The election's been called. On the way in, I can see the lawn signs, and I get into the courtroom, and the judge looks at me and he says, "Where's your lawyer?" I said, "I don't have one." "Why not?" "Because this is a criminal offense, and I have to get a criminal lawyer." And as I turn, the table has 4 or 5 criminal lawyers sitting there. And I said, "And every criminal lawyer that I know of is involved in a political party, and it's a conflict of interest. I can't trust them. The judge threw me out. He says, enter the docket with you. Throws me out of the courtroom. And the legal aid lawyer came out, and he says, it's not closed properly? The legal aid lawyer comes out, and he says, what do you want to do? So, well, I'm competent enough to start the process, get a court date, and from there, you know, once I get going, if I want to have a lawyer, I'll hire one. If not, I'll continue on my own. So he goes back into the courtroom. 5 minutes later, I get called back in. I walk up to the judge. He says, what do you want to do? I said, I'm competent enough to start the court case on my own. He says, listen, you, and his finger went up in the air like that. Listen, you, we can't beat around the bush on this one. We have to act on this immediately. And I said, yes, and that's why, you know, if I can get a court date, I'll start proceedings on my own, and if I think I want to hire a lawyer then, I'll do so. But until then, I'm on my own. And the judge would not let me finish. He would hit me again and again and again, and I try to repeat it over and over. And after the third time, the legal aid lawyer gets up. He says, Mr. Brisson wants a court date, and once he's given that court date, if he finds a lawyer, he'll, you know, get him. If not, he'll do it on his own. And the judge went, oh, okay. I said it 3 times. Wouldn't accept it from me. Legal aid lawyer stands up, repeats it like a parrot. No problem. Oh, that's great. And then the judge starts writing out the order, and then he says, once you've found a lawyer, give his name to the Crown, and he went like this, and they can have a conference together. Now, the joining of the fingers meant, oh, they would really screw me hard here. My friend said, I outwitted them because they probably figured different ways of dealing with me. And I outwitted them by not showing up. If I would have showed up with a lawyer, the intent was the lawyer said, okay, we got a court date, everything's set. You can't talk about the GST during the election. There's a gag order. But without a lawyer, there's no one to tell me that. The judge didn't tell me. He didn't tell me I couldn't talk about it. The lawyer's supposed to do that, not the judge. So, my hands are clear. Free and clear. They made a mistake. Now they've started the court process. I'm ready. I'm going. The issue is all mine to promote. No one's talking about the GST. The Liberals don't want to talk about it. The Conservatives definitely don't want to talk about it. They're the ones who brought it in. The Liberals haven't mentioned a word about it. It's all mine to vent and to rant and to say what's wrong with it. Using slavery. At the first debate, the MP in my area, his name was Don Boudrillo, and he's a Liberal MP, and he is a lapdog for Jean Chrétien. Jean Chrétien will tell him how to jump. He'll say, how high? He's first to speak at the first debate. And he gets up, and it's a plastic table. It's very flimsy. He gets up, and the first words that came out of his mouth, he's got his bare knuckles banging down on the table and says, GST has got to go. And the table's trembling, making all kinds of noise. And he's very powerful, and he's a very thin, not a very muscular man, but he made a lot of noise. And he yelled this out. And the crowd stood up and gave him applause, a standing ovation. And I just lost it. Just lost my thunder. He took it all. He took the issue of slavery because the Liberals were now going to repeal the GST. It was now in their platform. They're going to take it out. I was second to talk, and I said, yeah, I'm all for that. But I had no thunder now. He stole it. Long story short, Jean Chrétien won and didn't repeal it. Court case still on. In court, we ended up in court in '94, a year after. Their argument was, we raised a slavery issue, but they said, no. Doing paperwork is not a slavery issue. Because anyone and everyone, when they're told or they're asked, they have to do paperwork for the government. Doesn't matter if it's an income tax return, doesn't matter if it's a GST return, doesn't matter if it's a Stats Canada return, it's paperwork. They put all the paperwork on an equal basis. They said when you receive paperwork, you must file it. There's an obligation to file. And that's what they were throwing at me. Nothing to do with GST returns. Well, there was GST returns, but nothing to do with taxes. It was just paperwork that has to be done. And after the first day, my lawyer, I had found a lawyer, he says, "You're done." Actually, he says, you know, another word for intercourse. And I said, "I know." He says, "Well, you know?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what are we here for then?" He said, "To plug the loophole." I said, "There's a big loophole, and I'm going to plug it." I was found guilty, but in the process of the trial, an interesting fact was brought out. My lawyer, and I have to give him credit for this, found that because GST is under the Excise Tax Act and not the Income Tax Act, they cannot willy-nilly take anybody to court like Revenue Canada does for income tax. Revenue Canada doesn't like somebody, they can take them to court. They'll make up things, they can, you know, they're making an in-shop assessment of your lifestyle, and now you're in. You're in to go to court, and you have to defend yourself as best you can. But with excise tax, because it's an older tax, and it's the first one that was in Canada compared to income tax, it is connected to the politicians. The politician is the one, meaning the Minister of Finance or Minister of Revenue, is the one that will delegate the authority to Revenue Canada, or the bureaucracy, to take someone to court on an excise tax issue, and GST is under the excise tax. When my lawyer was interviewing all the government people, he started asking them, who did the decision to take Mr. Brisson to court? And they all went, not me, not me, not me, not me here, not me there. So my lawyer then brought out the fact that a delegation of authority was necessary. So the judge took a break and he said, can't find one, but we'll finish the trial anyway. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled in favor of the government, but he said, a delegation of authority is necessary. I haven't seen one, we'll assume that one exists. On that assumption, I would have liked for him to say, they never provided one, case dismissed. I would have had a victory, but I would not have plugged the loophole. That was coming down the road. I would have, like I said, you always like coming out of there with a victory. Because I sat there for 3 days taking blow after blow after blow of what their comments and innuendos were. Anyway, we get a day of sentence, a verdict, I mean, and a day of sentence. And the day of sentence was a month later in Ottawa. And I'm ready to give my my fire back. We get a break because now the Crown is asking that all 10 returns, they charge me for 2, but they want all 10 returns to be applied to the charge. And the charge is failure to file, and it brings out a $1,000 fine for every return not done. And they were also asking for 6 months in jail as a penalty, and a probation not to do it again. So the judge took a break, and in that break I went into the corridor with the friends that came to the court, and another friend had arrived late, and I had told him what I was going to do. He comes running up and says, Jean-Serge, have you had a chance to give your returns yet? And there's a lady from the province that had been there the first time. She was sitting on a bench. She had attended the trial, and she said, she wasn't talking to me anymore. She had talked to me earlier, but she was there with elephant ears on, trying to listen to what was going to be revealed. And as I saw my friend coming in, I'm going, okay, now's the time to let it out. They said, what do you mean, give the returns? And he says, well, Jean-Serge is going to give his GST returns with zeros on it. And they said, what do you mean? He says, well, where it says GST collected, he's going to put down 0 because of his disclaimer on his invoices. He's going to write down 0 collected, 0 to remit, and sign them that way. It's legal. It's a truthful return. I'm not lying on my returns. When the lady from the province heard this, the Crown was coming down. She gets up, grabs the Crown by the arm, and she said, "We have to talk," and dragged her back into the courtroom. I said to my friends, "Gotta go," and I followed them in the courtroom. And I'm sitting at my desk in the courtroom, where I'm allowed, to where that coffee pot is. The Crown and the person from the province are standing about that far away. And in the courtroom, the sound carries very well. They're talking, the Crown is talking away a mile a minute, and the lady from the province, she's trying to shut her up, and she literally said, "Shut up! I've got something to tell you. Your guy is going to give you the returns with zeros on it." And the Crown's arm fell, and she said, "Well, that's stupid." She said, "No, because during your trial, you only said you wanted returns filed. You never said how they had to be filed. He doesn't collect taxes." And she explained the zeros to her. She says, "Now he's going to give you returns that are truthful. You can't charge him for false returns because of his disclaimer. Now the only thing, because they were under the impression if I started doing the returns, I was bound to collect the taxes. I would have to collect the taxes. They never thought that I would put down zeros. So now they've got a heck of a dilemma. What do? And the lady from the province says, the only thing we have left is to charge him for not collecting taxes, but we can't fight that issue because he'll invoke slavery and we'll lose." They said it just like that. It's not officially on any record, but they said it to my face. They will lose on the issue of slavery. They cannot argue it. So the judge returned, court is resumed. He gave me a $1,000 fine per return for the two. He refused the other rate. And he said, you have 10 days, you have 6 months to pay, default of payment, 10 days in jail for each return, which was 20 days in jail. I never went to jail, and I never paid it. To this day, those fines are still outstanding, and the government sends me a letter once a year reminding me that I owe them that amount. Which, I don't know what the terms are for, what's the term again? Excuse me. For statute of limitations. I don't know what it is, but definitely it can't be more than 10 years. And it should be expired, but they're trying to collect the money anyway. So that's where it sits. I gave them all 10 returns, and they gave me, and I said, "Can you give me a receipt for those 10 returns?" And they did. They gave me a receipt for 10 returns with zeros on it, and that receipt is in the book. That's all in the book. And she said, "Why are you giving this to me now? Why didn't you give us that 2 years ago?" I said, "Well, you started with the game playing. You're supposed to charge me for not registering. You registered me." So I said, "You were going to charge me for not doing the paperwork. You started this, I'm finishing it." So now every return I was going to do was going to have zeros on it. I appealed, and there was Bruce Ryder, who is the fellow from BC I talked about earlier. He also was charged, and his lawyer, Doug Christie, found that a delegation of authority was necessary. He invoked it. The judge told the Crown to get one. The Crown could not find one. Therefore, the case was thrown out. I used that in my appeal, and the judge in my appeal refused to accept that. And he said, no, you have to file it anyway. No delegation is necessary. The reason why that happened, I was in 95 that I started the appeal, and in 96, Sheila Copps, who ran on a platform that she was going to resign if the GST was not repealed, had to resign. But she had to resign and ran again for re-election in the period of my appeal. And I'm convinced somebody tapped on the judge's shoulder and said, "Can't let M. Brisson win. Let him appeal at a higher level if he has to." So that's why they ruled against me. Immediately after that, I stopped filing all income tax returns because they were using the information on the income tax return to assess how much GST I was not collecting. Meaning that they were using information I was willingly giving them to use against me in another department. So I said, I don't have to testify against myself. I'm not filing any more income tax returns. Ending the capacity to transfer information they could take me to court here, but they definitely don't want to take me to court there. So, and they never charged me. Reason is, I'd have gotten in court and said, well, Your Honor, I'm giving them information here, they're using it against me here. So I have to protect myself, and I have the right to protect myself, and I'm not going to give them the information. So if they don't want to charge me here, if they want to charge me here but not charge me there, they can't pick and choose. They have to charge me on both. And the judge would have agreed. And they don't want that issue in court either. That's why I believe I was never charged for not filing income tax return. To this day, that's how it sits. 23 years later, after I burned my vendor's permit, that's how it sits. I don't know what else to tell you, except that now that the book is out, I'm hoping that either one of two things are going to happen. They will charge me, or they'll leave me alone. And if they continue to leave me alone, they're just proving that they can't fight this issue. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, I've been fighting the system for quite some time too. I just got charged for failing to file income tax for 14 years. And up to 2008, I refused to collect GST for 14 years, I believe now. I haven't really done anything with GST at all. I just basically put my disclaimer on it.
Oh, you have a disclaimer on it?
With the help of Dave, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I wrote it down, each receipt. I didn't get receipts printed out for business receipts, but
Well, that's what I did in the beginning. I just had stamps on it.
yeah. And they went along and assessed me and continued to assess me with assessment notices, and it grew. I didn't send in my returns at all, and finally I did with the coaxing of Dave, said, Pat, just get rid of your number somehow, and I begged and pleaded with them, and finally they wanted my social insurance number to match my request on my forms, put the two together because I have this issue with my social insurance number in court and so on, and the same thing with liaison for the tax over with the GST. And I'm a pretty emotional guy, so it's a little testy for me. But anyways, as it was, I finally talked to Dave and says, well, go ahead, put your social insurance number on and admit that you have your GST company, and basically they revoked my number.
They revoked your GST
but I
number?
haven't had a bank account to take assessments from in like about 5 years as well. So they had no way of trailing along to make an assessment, binding assessment. It was all done on an assumption. And finally, they just left me alone. And right to this day, I haven't had a letter back from the GST people in, I think, 4 years basically. So they left me alone. Other than it's possible that if they find out sometime later I do the $30,000 a year, they want to reassess. They want to reinstate that number, that same number again back to me. They did that with my own business partner as well. So much of what you're saying holds true, but I just, it's like you could petition the Supreme Court on the slavery issue too, but perhaps you didn't do that because I don't know why you would have hesitated on petitioning the Supreme Court. But that was another question I had too, was why would you petition the Supreme Court on the slavery issues when you probably had the ability to do so? It's interesting because I've been hearing about it for quite some time, and nothing's coming to the court about it.
The reason is I don't have the resources to start that kind of an action.
Okay.
And basically, what I've learned, when I showed you the Court of Appeal of Ontario on the sign bylaw, Howard Galvanoff and I initiated that. And it cost us close to $150,000. If you get charged, they have the obligation of proving their case.
Okay.
So you're better off reacting to the action because they have to build their case. But when you're going up for it, as you're saying, I have to build a case. And now I have to prove my point. I have to, does my challenge meet the test of having to repeal all, because one thing I didn't mention, while in court for the GST, the lady from the province came up to me while there was a break, and she said, if you win, you're affecting a lot. I said, I know. She says, I'm not just talking about PST and GST. I said, I know. And she kept on going. She says, you're affecting payroll deductions, unemployment insurance, CPP, income tax deductions, even union dues collected by business for unions. She says, you're affecting it all. There's no more forcing business to take anything off an employee's check and forward it to the various departments they want to. I said, yeah, I know. That's the reason why we're here. When she realized that I knew what they knew, then panic really set in. And that is exactly the goal right now. is I'm not just talking about taxes. I'm talking about the whole kit and caboodle of what responsibilities are being put on the back of businesses on having to collect money for the government. Any dime. Right now in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne wants to bring in a new pension plan. And guess who's going to collect it? Businesses are going to be legislated on having to collect it. And if they come up with a new way of collecting money from someone, it's always going to be the businesses. Business collect between 80 to 90% of every dollar that goes to our government, federally and provincially. The economy in Canada, I was told, was 1.5 trillion. It might be closer to 2. Figure the underground economy in there, 20 to 30%. Some say it's much higher, but let's say 20 or 30%. What we're looking at between $4 to $5 billion of the underground economy. That is what is really keeping this country going. Because government, federally and provincially, are estimated of taking 60% of that economy. So out of $1.5 trillion, that's $900 billion that is siphoned through the government before it comes back into the economy. Prior to the First World War, the economy, what the government was taking out of the economy was 10%. We're at 60. It used to be 10. So if we were to put the same ratio to today's numbers, federal and provincial governments together would take $150 billion out of the economy, and that's it. The other $750 would float around freely without being taxed, without having to go through the government before it comes back to us. In Ontario, we have a population of 13 million. 1.3 million people work for the province of Ontario. That's 1 in 10 citizens. But you take off the kids, go to school, the students, the elderly, the retired, you're down to 8 million people working. Take off the 1.3, you're below 7 million people in the private sector to support the public sector. So 1 in 6.5 jobs, 6.5 people have to work to maintain a public job. The province of Ontario is going to spend $10,000 for every man, woman, and child in the province. We're going to be indebted by another $13 billion. We're reaching the $300 billion mark as of debt in Ontario. The only reason we haven't been bankrupt, like California, is because the public sector pensions are funded. California aren't funded. That's why they're a basket case. Ours apparently is funded in Ontario. Otherwise, we'd be a basket case also. But we have a third of the population, and we have half as much of the debt that Canada has. Ontario has half of the national debt. So we put the national debt and Ontario's debt, and all the debts, we're over $1 trillion in debt across the country. So and what you were talking earlier, this here is a Markovich decision. It came out in 2003. Prior to 2003, I was getting letters from Revenue Canada to file. When the Markovich decision came out, this fellow is a guy from BC. He owed $250,000 to BC government in 1986. He said he was going to go bankrupt. 12 years later, he's still in business, did not go bankrupt. BC government got up to him and said, "Oh, great, you know, you're still here? Fine. We want our $250,000 plus the penalty plus the interest." Came out to $750,000. He said, "No way, I'm challenging this." He took it to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada said, just like anybody else, the government has to make an effort to collect the money. You can't just send an electronic statement in the mail. If I owe you money, and you send me a statement once a year, but that's all, after a certain amount of time, you can't collect it anymore. They made the same decision for the federal government too, and provincial government. You only have so much time, and you have to make an effort to take it to court, or to prove that debt is owed. But sending an electric statement every year, not good enough. And that's what the Markovich decision was all about, in principle. Now, they might have changed the timeline, I don't know, I haven't followed it anymore. Dave could probably tell you more about it if you ask him, but the principle of Markovich still stands. And in 2003, all requests by governments to file any document stopped. because the last time we've been in court was in '94, and it had been over, well, it was coming up to 9 years. And they had made a seizure. I had 2 seizures in my shop. Both tried to close me down. One municipal, I talk about municipal tax in the book, and one federal. And the federal one, basically, they tried to close me down. The bailiff who made the seizure, after the Reverend Canada guy was gone, he was washing his hands because I have a lot of soot in my shop, and he said, you know, he says, I make 9 seizures a week for Revenue Canada. 9 seizures a week, and 5 of them are for Revenue Canada. Revenue Canada closes more business in Canada than anybody else, even the hard times.
Wouldn't it be easier just to have it all corporate, like our whole country corporate, and then they could do whatever they wanted to? Because I think the mom and pops are just gone. I think everything's going to go corporate, and then you and me won't be having these discussions here.
I don't think so, because I think there is a large segment of the population that will always remain self-employed, small. Corporations are used for certain things. They're good for certain things, but not no good for everything else. While I was having a ball hockey game with some friends, one friend was working for the GST department, and people were asking me, you know, about taxes and everything and how it was going, and I told them they can't force me to collect. And he says, oh yes, we can. He says, we just got a corporation the other day, and we forced them to collect GST. I said, yes, a corporation, because a corporation is a dead entity. You have to have someone who's living act for it. So you can order the corporation, you will collect taxes, and you can pay somebody within the corporation to do it. It's not our problem. But the corporation itself is the entity we face. We don't care of everybody else in the corporation. The corporation itself is in front of us. We're saying you must collect taxes. But I said they can't tell it to me because I have rights that the corporation doesn't have. Because I'm alive.
You've never been a corporation, you've been a proprietorship.
Pardon?
You've never operated as a corporation.
I always operated as a proprietorship. Always operated as a proprietorship. Never had a corporation. Now my shop is owned by a corporation, but I rent from the corporation. All your assets can be in a corporation, but you, as an individual, can do business with that corporation as a separate entity.
You still file 0 GST returns?
I don't file GST returns at all anymore. I stopped in '86. When the decision came out that they refused my appeal, I stopped filing again. Come on, let's go to court. Let's find this delegation this time. See, this is what happened, is every time they took me to court, information came out that I could use the next time we go in. They never charged me for the same thing twice. Because I've learned, every time I went to court, I learned something about how they operate, how they maneuver people into a corner so that they get the best of them.
So, is it better, like for myself with local supporting locals, I'm a sole proprietor. Is it better to register as a corporation and then?
It depends on the circumstance. My shop right now is owned, the corporation that owns my shop is owned by my sister. Could I own the corporation directly? Maybe.
And who owns your house? Not you.
Oh, it's under my mom's name because it's on the family farm. Until my mom passes away, I don't have to deal with that issue right now. But probably the house will be transferred to the corporation that owns the shop. Yeah. It's not a battle I'm ready to fight right
Not
now.
what you own, it's what you control.
Pardon?
It's not what you own, it's what you control.
Correct. And if I control the corporation, will they come after me? There are people testing it right now, and they could probably answer it better than I could. But for my situation, I decided that, because the federal, provincial, municipal government all put liens on my shop, and I broke them. I broke them all. And they were broken simply by going through the legal process. I followed the law as it was done, and I used it against them. And this is what they found very hard to deal with, is that I used their own laws against them. I analyzed the process, and I'm going, this is what I can do. And I did, and they lost at everything. They'd win battles, but they lost wars.
But they wear us all down, my friend. They wore me down. I'm a battler.
Yeah.
You're a warrior, my friend. And I'm just disassociating now. It's all about disassociation. That's what I can do now. I couldn't exist and persist in that kind of case scenario.
Yeah, no, like I said, the information that's in the book I'm not telling people they have to do it. I'm just telling you my story, what I did. If something in there can be useful, so much the better. But what I'm hoping that will happen though, is that with every book that I sell, the invoice you have in front of you that I passed out, I also made more, and I sell my books with an invoice. It's a business for me now. Just like I was selling my radiators, I'm also selling my books, and if someone wants an invoice, I make up an invoice, and the people can now send in the tax to the government. Because try and go next door and pay your tax bill. You can't. They won't let you in. But, and if you send your taxes that you've been assessed as owing to the Minister of Finance, you'll get in trouble. But if you send in $1, well, the GST is 5%, on $20 would be $1. I'm not sure if there's provincial sales tax on books in BC. There isn't in Ontario. So it's $1 tax. People are putting $1 check in the mail and sending it to the Minister of Revenue, Minister of Finance of the federally, and Minister of Finance provincially, telling them this has to end. Businesses have to end being the tax collectors for governments. And if this was to happen with 1,000 letters, every letter they perceive that it represents 400 or 500 people. 1,000 letters end up in the government's hands, and they're in the finance departments, or not, excuse me, in the minister's, finance minister's offices. 1,000 letters is 500,000 people. 10,000 letters is millions of people. You will never get, I'm the only one in North America, probably on the planet, that's doing with this invoice thing now. Officially. And if I can reach the 10,000 limit, because the 10,000 books sold in Canada is a bestseller. If I reach that, and 10,000 invoices go into the government, they have a problem in their hands. They will know they have a problem in their hands, and something will have to be done with the way taxes are collected. Either that, or they have to take me to court. But by that time, there'll be too much attention to the issue. Any further questions? Yeah?
When was the last time you filed a personal tax return?
91. I filed 94 for 91. So, 20 years, 23 years, depending how you look at it.
No correspondence trying to get you to file?
As I said, it stopped in 2003 with the Markovich decision. The minute the Markovich decision came out, no more request to file. Because I was past the 6 years.
You're the hot potato like Dave, I guess.
Something along that line. Well, again, as Dave Brown said, every time he did an article about me, he'd get a phone call. Stop giving that man attention. They don't want it in the media. And as I said, I've been in the media on a lot of different issues. As I showed in the beginning, the sign bylaw, I was all over the papers in the Ottawa area, different issues. But I am politically active. That might be something different than what other people are facing, is I'm politically active. I mean, when I go back, CFRA, the head host, the morning host, Steve Madeley, I spoke to him when my book was just coming out, just from being printed. And he does book reviews of various people who are authors. And he said he would not consider giving me an interview unless my book is in chapters. Well, it's in chapters. And after this tour, I can claim, I just went on a book tour, hundreds of books were sold, so I'm going to get an interview. Now, Steve Madeley was very positive on support for the sign bylaw. So I've gained notoriety, in a sense, with him. And I know that when I approach him again and refresh his memory, he gave me a quick interview. If you go to my website, jean-sergebrisson.net, there are several interviews, and the one on December 23rd, 2010 is an interview I did with Steve Madeley for 9 minutes, and he was having a heart attack on air. Couldn't believe what I was doing. So, the doors are open. I have, when I go back, I have 3 more presentations to make in the Ottawa and Toronto area, and after that I have to start booking again, but I haven't worked on that. I'm going to let Christmas go by probably and start again after January, unless people voluntarily.
How's the rod business going?
Grab business on its own is dying. It's a dying trade. But I had people who did stop dealing with me for fear of being audited by the government. I had, pardon?
You still have enough money?
Yes, I've expanded into other fields. I went into air conditioning. I went into recycling cars. And right now I'm milking cows morning and night.
Survivor.
Yeah, I do.
And be a survivor.
Yeah, you have to become a survivor. I mean, I didn't choose to be an actor, to challenge a government like this because it was going to be fun. I chose to do it because I wanted to defend my rights. I believe my rights, if I let my rights be trampled on, what have I got left? At any time that the government wants to do away with me, they can if I don't defend my rights. I mean, 1984, when I read 1984, I said, this can't happen. I for one, am not going to be pushed around. And when the time came, I felt I had to act.
Absolutely.
Any other question? Yeah?
So, what about the people that argue that if you don't pay your taxes, our roads don't get fixed, the hawk?
As I said, if businesses stop collecting money for the government will have to reassess or modify the way that taxes are collected. One is they'll have to deal with each individual. Now, even working at minimum wage, let's say in Ontario, the minimum wage is now $11. Well, each dollar that's being paid by the employer, it's costing him $1.50 actually, because he's got payroll deductions, but he's also got to supplement unemployment insurance. He's got to pay something in Canada Pension Plan. He's got to pay WCP, yeah, WC, yeah, all the workman's comp, whatever you want to call it. So actually, he's forking out $15 an hour. Well, what if that $15 an hour was given to the employer, to the employee, and he's told, here, now you have to send it in. Well, now the employee who was only getting $100 off his paycheck before, now he's going, what? I'm losing $6 an hour out of 15. 6 goes to the government somewhere. I'm only getting to keep 10. What would he do? What would that employee do, man or woman? What would they do?
They'll smoke it and drink it up.
They'll signing that check once a month. Now they're going to start thinking like business people. Now they're going to say, yeah, I want this to change. we have our healthcare in Ontario. It's costing $6,000 for every man, woman, and child. Well, if you were given $6,000 tomorrow, would you give it back to the government for your healthcare, or you go out and seek private healthcare? If it was allowed, but private healthcare isn't allowed in Ontario anyway. Not full private healthcare.
I haven't heard anything about bullying and bullying laws. It seems to me that the government plays its role every year about these anti-bullying laws. And I mean, it's one thing to put a due process forward. It's another thing to use intimidating tactics. I just think that somewhere or another in the next period of time, we're going to have to connect this bullying factor with these processes. Because really, they are forms of bullying and harassment, if you will. I mean, it's sort of due process, how it would be done is fine, but to create a bullying atmosphere is contrary to all these bullying laws that you hear about every day on the radio now.
Yeah.
Cyberbullying. What's cyberbullying? Your own government can bully the whole freaking country.
Well, it's an issue.
There.
It's an issue that I'm not in a position to talk about it because I've bullied them.
Well, I guess we can fight a little bit of fire with fire.